It was just after 8 p.m. on a quiet December evening when I felt the weight of another silent rejection settle over me like fresh snow, cold, soundless, and impossible to ignore. I had just finished cleaning up after a simple dinner. Rice, black beans, and the last bit of roast I'd made on Sunday. Nothing fancy, but it filled the house with warmth, something that had become rare since Maria passed. I poured myself a small cup of coffee, sat in my old chair by the window, and opened my phone, an ordinary habit that would become anything but. I wasn't expecting anything special. Maybe a few texts from my sister Rosa, maybe one of those ridiculous forwarded memes from an old coworker. What I wasn't prepared for was what I saw on Isabella's Instagram story. There it was, glowing on my screen in filtered perfection, Sparkle's New Year's Eve dinner, formal attire, hosted by Michael and Isabella Sparkles, written in gold script over a photo of their dining room, already decorated. A long table stretched beneath a chandelier I'd helped them install myself. Silverware arranged like they were hosting royalty. Name cards. Wine glasses. And beneath the image, a caption that sliced through me like glass: "Can't wait to ring in 2026 with our favorite people." Favorite people. I kept looking, telling myself I had misunderstood. I tapped back and forth on the story, like maybe I had missed a part. But as I looked closer, the pit in my stomach only deepened. There was a boomerang of Isabella clinking glasses with her best friend Heather. A video of Michael laughing with coworkers from his new job. A group photo taken during their planning brunch last weekend, at the same restaurant I once treated them to when Michael was unemployed and nearly broke. Everyone was tagged. Cousins. Neighbors. Even Isabella's yoga instructor. Everyone but me. I scrolled down to the comments on a regular post she'd made earlier that day. A perfect shot of their New Year's centerpiece, with dozens of hearts and emojis. Someone wrote, "So excited to be there. Do you want me to bring dessert?" Another replied, "What time should we arrive?" Isabella answered, 7:30 sharp. Can't wait to see everyone. I searched for any hint of a message to me. Nothing. Not a text. Not a voicemail. Not even one of those polite, half-hearted invitations out of obligation. Just silence. And that silence was louder than anything I'd heard all year. I leaned back in my chair, my coffee forgotten on the side table. I stared at the ceiling like it could offer an answer, or maybe shield me from the weight pressing into my chest. There was no mistake. They were having a big, fancy dinner. And I wasn't invited. Again. This wasn't the first time they'd excluded me from something special, but it was the first time they hadn't even bothered to hide it. The first time they had made it so public, so definitive. And as much as it hurt, it was also clarifying. You know, I've always tried to be the quiet one in the background. The reliable one. The one who shows up, pays the bills, fixes the leaky pipe, takes the dog to the vet when they're on vacation. I've never asked for thanks, never demanded recognition. I believed that love was shown through action. That maybe, eventually, it would be enough. But on nights like this, you realize love unreciprocated starts to feel like humiliation. And this wasn't just about New Year's Eve. This was about years of being slowly pushed further and further to the edge of their lives. A little less welcome each time. A little less visible. First it was Thanksgiving, where I was asked to drop off the tamales instead of staying. Then it was Michael's birthday last year, celebrated out of town with just a few friends. Now, it was a formal holiday gathering in the very house I had helped pay for, and my name wasn't even on the guest list. I sat there for a long time, not moving. Just letting the ache settle into my bones. I thought about Maria and how she would have handled this. She would have said, "Let it go, Dennis. God sees everything. Just keep your dignity." But dignity is hard to hold on to when you feel invisible in your own family. A soft wind rattled the window beside me, and I looked out. My street was quiet, decorated modestly. A few houses had strings of lights up, nothing like the extravagance at Michael's place. His house practically glowed in the distance, a beacon of celebration. And somewhere in there, they were laughing, planning the final seating arrangements, folding napkins just so. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I wasn't even surprised. What I felt was a profound, bone-deep sadness. Not just because I wasn't invited, but because it had taken me this long to accept that I never really belonged. They used to say I was family. But what kind of family forgets the man who kept the lights on when they were unemployed? Who gave up his retirement fund to cover a down payment? Who stayed quiet when he was mocked for his accent, his food, his music? I opened my photos, just to torture myself a little more. Scrolled through old pictures of Michael as a boy. Birthday cakes I'd made from scratch. Christmas mornings with ripped wrapping paper and wide-eyed smiles. Photos of Maria with her apron on, laughing, flower on her cheek. And then I saw one photo in particular, a moment frozen in time. It was Michael's graduation. I was standing beside him, wearing the same blue shirt Isabella later called too basic for their events. But in that photo, he was smiling. Proud. Hands on my shoulders. No distance between us. What happened to that boy? I felt something shift inside me, just a little. Something long dormant. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was clarity. Or maybe it was just the final thread of a bond snapping after being stretched too thin for too long. I stood up and walked to the small desk in the corner of my living room. Pulled open the drawer I hadn't touched in months. There it was, the folder. Thick, overstuffed, and full of truth. Receipts, bank statements, transfer confirmations. Proof of what I had contributed. Proof of what I had given up. Every sacrifice documented. Every dollar accounted for. I closed the drawer slowly and looked around my house. Small. Quiet. Worn. But mine. Paid for. Earned with years of sweat and patience and integrity. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something. Maybe being excluded wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was a liberation. Because when someone doesn't invite you to their table, maybe it's time to build your own. I sat back down, finished my now cold coffee in one gulp, and opened a clean page in my notebook. At the top, I wrote, New Year's resolution, stop apologizing for being left out. Under it, in smaller letters, this time, they'll remember who they left out. And why. People think sacrifice is this noble, uplifting thing. A heroic act done in the light for everyone to admire. But the truth? Real sacrifice happens quietly. Behind closed doors. Without applause. It looks a lot like silence. And it feels a lot like slowly disappearing. That's what my last 7 years had been, one long, quiet erasure of who I was, traded piece by piece for the illusion of family. When Michael and Isabella bought their house, they were drowning in debt. The bank had already denied their loan once. Michael called me late one night, his voice small, embarrassed, desperate. Dad, we just need a little help with the down payment. Just until things stabilize. He didn't need to say more. I'd heard that tone before, when he was a child and broke his favorite toy, when he crashed my old pickup in high school, when Maria passed and he called me sobbing from the airport because he hadn't arrived in time. So I said yes. I refinanced our house, the home Maria and I built from scratch. I walked into the bank, signed the papers, and walked out with $47,000 less and a weight in my chest that I pretended not to feel. Isabella didn't say thank you. She said, we'll pay you back. You're just helping us get started. They never paid a cent. The next year, Michael lost his job. Corporate downsizing, he said. Isabella's online business hadn't taken off yet, and suddenly their bills were mine. Just a couple of months, he promised. That couple of months turned into 5 years. Every month, like clockwork, $2,800 disappeared from my account and reappeared in theirs. Mortgage. Utilities. Emergency plumbing. Private school tuition for their son, my grandson, even though I was never invited to his school plays. I watched from a distance as he grew up through photos posted online, filtered and cropped, always perfect, always polished. I was never in them. And yet I kept paying. I wore the same coat for 6 winters. I stopped buying steak. Switched to discount grocery stores. Fixed the water heater myself instead of calling a plumber. I told myself I was just being frugal. Wise. But the truth is, I was just trying to make room for their life inside mine. And they never even noticed. They called it help. They called me generous. But generosity implies choice. At some point, it stopped being a choice and became an expectation. They didn't ask anymore. They informed me. Isabella would say, the property tax is due, like she was reading a weather report. She had a way of making requests sound like duties. Like I owed her something. Like by helping them, I was simply fulfilling my role. And I played that role so well, I started forgetting who I was before it. I was a business owner once. A builder. A man who shook hands with calloused palms and took pride in getting his hands dirty. I employed people. I solved problems. I fixed things. But in their world, none of that mattered. In their world, I was just a background character. The quiet man who wrote checks and didn't speak too loudly at dinner. Isabella didn't like it when I spoke Spanish in public. Said it made people uncomfortable. Once, I brought homemade tamales to their New Year's brunch, before they started excluding me from those too, and she said, "It's a nice gesture, Dennis, but next time maybe something a little more elegant? Something that fits the theme?" I remember driving home that day with a full tray of untouched tamales on the passenger seat, steam fogging up the windows. I didn't cry. But something cracked inside me. Something I didn't know how to name. That's the thing about humiliation, it doesn't always arrive with yelling or insults. Sometimes, it comes wrapped in politeness. In a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. In a party you helped fund, but weren't welcome to attend. And still, I stayed quiet. I told myself I was doing it for Michael. That he was caught in the middle. That he loved me, deep down. That one day he'd stand up for me. He never did. Not when Isabella joked about my clothes in front of her friends. Not when her father, Cody, made a comment about self-made men usually staying in their lanes. Not when they started introducing me as Dennis, the handyman, instead of my father. He smiled. Shrugged. Changed the subject. And I let him. Because I believed in family. I believed in sacrifice. But now, looking back, I realize I wasn't sacrificing. I was surrendering. I surrendered my dignity, inch by inch, in the name of peace. I swallowed every insult like medicine, convincing myself it was good for the family. That I was holding it together. That I was doing the right thing. But there comes a time when silence becomes betrayal of yourself. And the worst part? They never once asked how I was doing. Never noticed when I sold my truck to keep their payments on time. Never asked why I didn't go on trips anymore. Never wondered how a retired man could keep sending money every month without consequences. Because they didn't care. They didn't see me as a person. Just a resource. An invisible man with a visible wallet. When Maria died, I thought I'd lost everything. But what I didn't know then was that grief is clean. It hurts, yes, but it's honest. You know what you're mourning. What I've lived since has been messier. A long, slow ache that you can't name, because the people hurting you are the same people you love. And that love clouds everything. It makes excuses. It justifies. It forgives too soon and too often. Until you find yourself standing alone, on New Year's Eve, staring at party invitations meant for everyone but you. Until you open your fridge and realize the only food inside is what you could afford after paying someone else's champagne bill. Until you look in the mirror and wonder when exactly you started disappearing. I hadn't made a single New Year's resolution in 7 years. I didn't believe in them. What was the point of promising change when nothing ever did? But this year would be different. This year, the silence would end. Because love without respect is not love. Because support without acknowledgement is not generosity, it's exploitation. Because sacrifice without gratitude is not noble, it's slavery. And I was done being their silent servant. I looked at the clock on the wall. 10:04 p.m. The year was ending. So was my patience. I walked over to the fireplace and picked up the photo of Maria. She was smiling in it, the way she always did when she was proud of me. And for the first time in years, I looked at her and whispered, "I think you'd be proud of me now." I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was clear. And clarity, I've learned, is the first gift you receive when you finally stop sacrificing for people who never asked how much it cost you. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from pretending you didn't hear what was said about you. Not because you didn't hear it, but because you weren't supposed to. Because if you had acknowledged it, if you had reacted, it would have forced everyone in the room to confront the truth they were all too comfortable ignoring. So you let it pass. You smile. You nod. You pretend. I became an expert at that kind of silence. It started small. I remember the first time Isabella made a comment that stung. We were having dinner at their place. Michael had grilled some chicken, and I'd brought over a big pot of arroz con pollo, something Maria used to make for every family get-together. The smell alone took me back to Sundays when laughter filled our kitchen and music played from the old radio. Isabella poked at her plate and said, "You know, Dennis, we're trying to eat cleaner these days. Less oil. Maybe next time something lighter?" She smiled as she said it. Her voice sweet. Polite. But her eyes said everything. Michael didn't look up. He just kept chewing. And I said nothing. I nodded and said, "Of course. That's how it starts. One comment. One little jab. Coated in sugar so you'll swallow it without a fight." The next time was at their housewarming party. They had just finished the kitchen remodel I paid for, granite countertops, double oven, those ridiculous custom cabinet handles that cost $300 more just because they were trendy. Isabella was giving a tour, all glowing pride. She waved her arm and said, "Thanks to Dennis, we got everything we wanted. He's been so generous. Like a silent investor." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But inside, I froze at the word, silent. Not generous father. Not pillar of support. Just silent. An investor without equity. A man whose money mattered more than his presence. Later that night, I overheard her telling one of her friends in the kitchen, "He means well. But you know, he's not cultured. He still listens to rancheras and brings tamales to every gathering." The friend giggled and said, "Oh no. Seriously?" Isabella whispered back, "Dead serious. He once showed up in a windbreaker. Like it was 2002. They both laughed. And I stood on the other side of the wall, holding the wine I'd brought, feeling like a ghost in a party I helped fund. I never wore that windbreaker again. There were more moments, too many to count. Like when I tried to talk about my old construction business at a dinner and Isabella interrupted, "That's so hands-on, Dennis. You're lucky you didn't get stuck in manual labor forever." Her father chuckled, sipping expensive scotch I had unknowingly paid for. Or when I told a story about Maria teaching our grandson to count in Spanish, and Isabella smiled and said, "Oh, but we're trying to keep things neutral at home. You know, not confuse him. Confuse him." As if Spanish, the language of my ancestors, of Maria's lullabies, of our prayers, was some kind of contaminant. I never taught him another word after that. Michael? He never defended me. Not once. He'd say things like, "You know how she is, Dad. Don't take it personally," or "Let's not start anything." Always the peacemaker, even if it meant letting me bleed quietly at his table. And I let him. Because what would have happened if I had spoken up? If I had said, "That's enough"? Would they have stopped? Or would I have become the angry, difficult old man who couldn't take a joke? No. I knew my role. The grateful father. The accommodating in-law. The one who nods and thanks them for the crumbs they offered, access to my own grandchild, a seat at a table I bought, a family that no longer saw me as anything but a burden with a wallet. And the more I said nothing, the more they pushed. There's a moment that still echoes in my mind. Isabella's parents were in town, and we were all at brunch. Fancy place. White tablecloths. Waiters who refill your water every 5 minutes. I was wearing a new shirt Rosa had bought me, simple, blue, button-down. I liked it. Catherine, Isabella's mother, glanced at me and said, "Michael, do you remember that etiquette seminar we took at the club? We were just saying how presentation matters so much these days. You can tell a lot about someone by how they dress." I looked down at my shirt. Blue. Clean. Tucked in. Michael gave a small laugh and changed the subject. I didn't eat much that morning. Just drank my coffee and pretended it wasn't happening. Again. But here's the thing, pretending not to hear doesn't make the words less real. It just teaches them that they can say worse next time. And they did. They questioned how I grieved Maria. Said I should be moving on already. They rolled their eyes when I talked about Sunday Massachusetts, said I was old-fashioned. They joked that my backyard looked like something from a working-class neighborhood. Every time I brought something from home, a dish, a story, a photo, they looked at it like a relic from a world they wanted no part of. At one point, Isabella told Michael to stop calling me Dad in public. Said it sounded too informal. Too immigrant. She wanted him to start saying, "my father." As if a change in title would make me less embarrassing. When I finally confronted Michael about it, quietly, in private, without raising my voice, he looked away and said, "You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. Too sensitive." That phrase stuck with me. Like a sliver under the skin that never quite heals. I started second-guessing everything. What I wore. What I brought. What I said. I edited myself in real time, shrinking my presence to make space for theirs. I stopped playing music in my truck when I drove to their house. Switched to classical stations, just in case they heard. I started using their words, elegant, curated, refined, as if changing my vocabulary would change the way they saw me. But it didn't. Because the problem wasn't what I said or did. The problem was who I was. And no amount of silence would ever be enough for people who were ashamed of the sound of my voice. That realization came slowly. Like fog lifting. Like waking up from a long, heavy sleep. I began to see the pattern, not just the insults, but the erasure. They hadn't just pushed me to the side. They had rewritten the family story, with themselves as the heroes and me as a footnote. The man who paid, who fixed, who helped, but was never mentioned. Never celebrated. Never invited. And now, after all those years, I was staring at one final insult, a New Year's Eve dinner in a house I helped build, surrounded by people who didn't even know my name. It wasn't just rejection. It was the culmination of 1,000 small betrayals, layered on top of each other like bricks in a wall that now stood between me and the people I loved most. But here's what they didn't realize. A man can only swallow so many insults before they stop going down. Eventually, one gets caught in your throat. And you either choke on it, or you spit it out. The thing about breaking points is that you never see them coming. You imagine they'll arrive like thunder, loud, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. But in truth, they arrive quietly, like a breath you didn't know you were holding, a sound you thought you could tolerate one more time. And then suddenly, you can't. For me, it came in the most ordinary way, over the phone, late afternoon, the sun barely beginning to set. I had just finished sweeping the back porch. My hands still carried the dust of dried leaves, the scent of cold air and old wood. The phone rang on the kitchen counter. I wiped my palms on my jeans before answering. "Hey, Dad," Michael's voice came through, casual, unbothered, as if everything between us hadn't been slowly unraveling for years. I already knew what was coming. You can hear it in the hesitation. That slight breath before the lie. "I just wanted to give you a heads up, about New Year's Eve," he began. I stood still, leaning slightly on the counter, eyes fixed on the steam rising from the coffee I'd just poured. "Isabella's parents are flying in again," he said, "and, well, they're staying with us. So dinner will just be close family this year." There it was. A blade, wrapped in softness, disguised as a reasonable request. "Close family," I repeated, tasting the bitterness of those two words. After everything I had done, after the money, the time, the silence, that was what I had become, not close enough. Michael kept talking, fumbling through justifications. Something about limited seating. About how the guest list got complicated. How Isabella's parents expect a certain atmosphere, and, you know how they are. I don't remember the rest. It all blended into a muffled blur, like white noise pouring out of a broken radio. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "I understand," and hung up. And in that moment, I truly did understand. I understood that I had raised a man who no longer recognized the value of sacrifice, who had become so entangled in the silk threads of social approval and appearances that he had forgotten who built the foundation beneath his life. I understood that I had been quietly erased, and that my only role now was to make room for people who thought their education, their clothing, and their silverware made them superior to the man who gave them shelter in their darkest seasons. I sat down, the weight of that phone call pressing down on me harder than I expected. There was no yelling, no explosion, no dramatic confrontation, just an unspoken confirmation that I no longer mattered. That I was an accessory to be hidden in the closet during special occasions. I looked around my house, still wearing the same jacket from when I swept the porch. My house wasn't big, and it certainly wasn't filled with designer accents or curated furniture. The curtains were old. The paint was chipped in places. The dining table had scratches from years of family meals, meals where Maria would laugh and serve second helpings before anyone asked, where Michael would rest his elbows despite our constant reminders, where life felt loud and full and real. I thought about that table now, sitting empty. I thought about Maria's chair, the one I hadn't touched since the day she passed. And I thought about how I had traded every last corner of that warmth to help fund a lifestyle I would never be invited to enjoy. That was the moment I reached for the folder. Thick, heavy, bulging with receipts, bank statements, emails, screenshots, and reminders of every time I had chosen them over myself. It had lived in my drawer for months, maybe longer. I had started it the year I noticed their tone changing. When Isabella first began correcting how I spoke in front of guests. When Michael's gratitude faded into assumption. I opened it like a case file, flipping through page after page of my own enabling. The mortgage payments, 60 of them. The down payment. The utilities. The property taxes. The $2,000 for their dog's surgery. The The tuition checks for a school whose plays I was never invited to attend. The new refrigerator they couldn't afford that appeared in a photo tagged #blessed. I stared at the numbers, watching my own generosity reduce me to a footnote in someone else's life. Over $200,000. Enough to replace my roof, repair the back deck, travel somewhere Maria had always dreamed of visiting. Gone. Spent. Forgotten. And for what? For a place I was no longer welcome. It wasn't just the money. That's what people on the outside would assume. That I was bitter because I stopped paying. But it was never just about the money. It was about the principle. About being used. About being loved only in the way a lamp or a refrigerator is loved, silently, passively, until it stops working. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was gradual. Incremental. It happened in the way Isabella introduced me as Dennis instead of Dad. In how Michael never stepped in to correct her. In how they told their son that Grandpa was old-fashioned, like a cautionary tale, not a human being with a story and a heart. It happened in every smile I forced at dinners where my opinions were politely ignored, in every "thank you" that came with a request attached, in every time I accepted scraps of affection while they feasted on my sacrifices. That night, after the call, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the folder on my lap, flipping through every page, every line item, every memory. And with each one, something inside me began to harden, not with hatred, but with clarity. The truth was simple. They had never loved me for who I was. Only for what I gave. And I had allowed it. But that was about to change. As dawn broke and the first light crept across my living room floor, I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat down at my desk, and made a list, not of resolutions, but of facts. A timeline. A map of every sacrifice, every payment, every slight. A record not of revenge, but of reality. Because this time, I wouldn't be dismissed as dramatic or too sensitive. This time, they would see. And if they still chose to look away, so be it. But I would no longer play the fool at a table where I wasn't welcome. I would no longer remain silent in the face of quiet cruelty. And I would not begin another year pretending I was part of a family that only remembered me when they needed something. Let them have their dinner. Let them raise their glasses and smile for the camera. Because soon, they would realize. The most dangerous man in the room isn't the one who shouts. It's the one who has finally stopped pretending not to hear. There's a strange calm that settles over you once a decision has truly been made, not considered, not debated, not postponed, but made with finality, deep in your bones. That's the kind of calm I felt the morning I pulled out the old leather briefcase from the top of my bedroom closet. It had belonged to Maria's father. Worn, dark brown, scuffed at the corners, with brass buckles that no longer locked but still snapped shut with a satisfying click. I hadn't used it in years. Not since I sold the business. It used to carry contracts, blueprints, receipts, floor plans. Now, it would carry something else, the truth. I laid it open on the dining table, the same table where Maria and I used to sit together every Sunday, sipping coffee and talking about everything we wanted to do with our retirement. Trips to the coast. A garden. Time with grandkids. That table, like me, had seen better years. But it was still solid. Still standing. One by one, I placed the documents inside the briefcase, the bank statements, mortgage transfer slips, credit card records, screenshots of their public posts bragging about their dream kitchen, the one I had funded without ever stepping foot inside again. I printed photographs from their social media, pictures of them at wineries, resorts, holiday dinners I'd never attended. I made notes in red ink in the margins of the newspaper article that had tried to smear my name. I underlined the lies, circled the omissions, wrote the word false next to every manipulation. It felt meticulous, methodical, like preparing a case for court. And in a way, I was. Only this court wouldn't be in a courtroom. It would be in the middle of their perfect dinner table, in the presence of all the people they had tried so hard to impress. Friends, colleagues, the curated social circle they built around a house made of my money and their deception. According to Isabella's event page, they were hosting 12 guests. I made 12 copies of everything. I didn't do it with rage in my chest. I did it with purpose. With intention. With the quiet resolve of a man who had spent far too long apologizing for the space he occupied in a family that no longer saw his worth. They thought I'd stay silent. That I'd sit alone at home on New Year's Eve while they toasted champagne in a house I helped them secure. That I'd drink my tea and eat leftovers, just like every year, and tell myself this is what love looks like when you're lucky. Not this year. This year, I would show up. Not as a beggar, not as a victim, not as the man who quietly wired money and bit his tongue, but as a father reclaiming his dignity. At noon, I dressed carefully. A navy blue suit, the one I had worn to Maria's funeral. I hadn't touched it since, but it still fit. I ironed the shirt. Polished my shoes. Combed my hair with care. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted to walk into that house looking like the man they had spent years pretending didn't exist. At 6:30 p.m., I placed the heavy briefcase gently in the passenger seat of my truck and drove through the twilight. The streets were festive. Lights on porches. Fireworks already cracking in the distance. Neighbors gathering. Music drifting from open windows. The entire city leaning into joy, unaware that I was driving towards something very different. I parked across the street from their house. The driveway was full. Guests were already inside. I could see them through the windows, dressed up, glasses in hand, laughter bubbling beneath soft jazz music. Isabella moved gracefully between them, the perfect hostess, all smiles and sparkle. Michael stood at the far end, drink in hand, nodding politely at a man in a blazer. I watched them for a moment. Not with bitterness. But with clarity. They had built an empire of appearances. But tonight, that empire would meet the man it had erased. I crossed the street slowly, steady. No nerves. No hesitation. And when I reached the front door, I didn't knock. The door, as expected, was unlocked. Isabella had once boasted to a neighbor that they didn't need to lock it. It's a good neighborhood, she'd said. People here respect boundaries. I opened the door and stepped inside. The warmth of the house hit me first. Then the smell, rosemary, lemon, wine, candle wax. The sounds of silverware on porcelain. The low hum of conversation. And then the silence. 12 heads turned as I stepped into the dining room, briefcase in hand. For a moment, the room stood frozen. Like a photograph just before it shatters. Michael's eyes widened. Isabella's face turned pale. "Dennis," she said sharply, stepping forward, her voice tight. "You weren't invited." "No," I said, setting the briefcase down gently on the sideboard. "I wasn't." I opened the latches. The snaps echoed like thunder in that room. "I won't be long," I said. "I just wanted to bring something for everyone here tonight. Since I helped pay for the wine, the plates, the chairs, and this entire house, I figured it's only fair I share a few things too." Murmurs spread across the room. A woman I didn't recognize, elegant, maybe a friend of Isabella's mother, whispered, "What is he talking about?" Michael started to speak, but I raised my hand. "No need, son. Let me." I moved around the table, placing one stack of documents in front of each guest. No rush. No performance. Just truth. "Inside," I said, "you'll find 5 years of financial records. Payments I made to support this household. To keep this family afloat. While I skipped doctor visits. While I ate canned soup for dinner. while I let the roof on my house leak another year because every dollar I earned went here. The room was quiet, the only sound the shifting of paper as curious hands began flipping through the files. The granite countertops? I nodded toward the kitchen. Page 6. $18,000. The down payment for the house? Page 2. $47,000. Mortgage payments? Pages 8 through 21, $2,800 a month for 5 years. Someone gasped. Isabella stepped forward again, voice shaking, trying to regain control. Dennis, this is not the time or the place. This is exactly the time, I interrupted. Because you made the decision to exclude me. To replace me. To lie about me. And now these people, your friends, your family, your followers, they get to see who you really are. I pulled out the newspaper article. Placed copies beside each document packet. And when you tried to ruin my name in the press, I continued, you left out the part where I was paying your mortgage while you smeared me as mentally unstable. Michael had sunk into his chair, head in his hands. Catherine, Isabella's mother, spoke up weakly, this is highly inappropriate. I turned to her, calm. So is excluding the man who funded your daughter's lifestyle from a single holiday dinner. Then, looking around the room, every guest now reading, eyes wide, faces twisted in discomfort, I said the last thing I came to say. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for truth. Because I've spent too many years being quiet. Too many years pretending not to hear the insults, not to feel the exclusions, not to notice the way I was being used and discarded. I walked back to the briefcase, closed it, and lifted it with one hand. Enjoy your dinner, I said, voice steady. It's the last one I'll ever pay for. And with that, I turned and walked out. Behind me, the silence cracked open. Voices rising, papers rustling, questions spilling into the space where illusion used to live. I stepped outside into the cold night. Fireworks exploded in the distance. Laughter echoed from another house. Life moved on. But for me, something had shifted forever. Because I had walked into that room as the forgotten man. And walked out as someone no one would forget. I didn't sleep that night, not out of regret, not out of fear, but because peace sometimes makes the silence feel too heavy to rest in. There was nothing left to explain, no apology to prepare for, no conversation I owed anyone. I had said what needed to be said, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in truth. And truth, no matter how late it arrives, always rearranges everything it touches. At 6:43 a.m., my phone began buzzing. I didn't answer. Not the first time. Not the second. Not the seventh. By 8 a.m., the calls had become relentless, Isabella, Michael, and even numbers I didn't recognize. I watched their names flash across the screen like warning lights, each one accompanied by a message I didn't need to hear to understand, damage control had begun. But I wasn't participating. Not this time. Instead, I made coffee and sat on the porch, wrapped in the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose, and therefore, had already won. The sky was overcast. A typical Spokane morning. Cool air, light wind, the kind of day Maria would have loved for baking. I imagined her sitting beside me, nodding softly, not saying much, but proud. Always proud. She would have understood what I did. She would have told me it was time. At 9:17 a.m., a knock rattled the front door. I didn't need to look, I already knew. Michael. I opened the door slowly. He stood there, disheveled, suit wrinkled from the night before, eyes bloodshot, carrying the look of a man who had spent the night watching something he built collapse in real time. "Dad," he said, voice low. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside and let him in. He looked around like it was the first time he was really seeing the house, how small it was, how lived in. The old recliner. The wall of fading family photos. The lamp that leaned slightly because the base had cracked years ago. All the things that didn't match their idea of elegance, but told the story of a real life. He sat on the edge of the couch, like a guest. I stood. "I came to say I'm sorry," he began. "I didn't know about the article until after it ran. I didn't write it. I didn't ask for it. You didn't stop it," I replied, simply. He nodded, shame rising in his face like heat. "No. I didn't. And I should've." There was a long pause. Not awkward. Just full. Then he said something that, even after everything, made my chest tighten. "I was embarrassed, Dad. Not of you. Of myself. I let her and her parents talk about you like you were beneath us, and I said nothing. For years. And when you walked into that room last night, I felt proud. And ashamed. Proud of you. Ashamed of me." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to. But the words had waited too long to come, and now they didn't rush forward as easily as before. He looked at me, eyes wet. "I know what I've lost. I know that house is built on your sacrifice, and I know what we've done to you. I'm not asking for forgiveness right now. I just needed to say it." I sat down across from him, folded my hands, and said what I had rehearsed only in my heart. "You didn't lose me, Michael. You gave me away. You handed me over piece by piece, year after year, every time you chose silence instead of standing beside me." He lowered his gaze. "I know. The problem isn't that you made mistakes. Everyone does. The problem is that you made them with your eyes open. I let her rewrite who you were," he whispered. "I let her decide that our story wasn't good enough for her standards. Was it worth it?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not for a second." Outside, the wind picked up. The porch chimes clinked softly, like applause from another life. "We're in foreclosure," he said after a long silence. "The letter came yesterday. 3 months behind. They're giving us 14 days to catch up, or they take the house." I already knew. Isabella's losing it. Her parents won't help. Cody's still furious about what you did. Said you humiliated them. I looked at him, dead in the eyes. "No, Michael. I didn't humiliate them. I revealed them." He didn't respond. Just sat there with that weight on his shoulders, the one I had carried for him for far too long. "And what do you want from me now?" I asked, calmly. He blinked. I don't know. I'm not asking for money. Not anymore. I want to fix this. I want my father back." I stood, walked to the mantel, and picked up 2 photographs. One of Maria. The other of me with Rosa and her grandkids from Easter. The first holiday I'd spent with people who actually wanted me at the table. I turned back to him and said, "Fixing this doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means rebuilding something honest. From scratch. No expectations. No entitlements. Just effort. Real effort." "I can do that," he said quietly. "Then prove it." He stood. "Will you ever come back? To the house? To visit?" I gave a soft smile. "That house was never mine, Michael. And now it's not yours either." He left a few minutes later, quieter than he arrived, walking back out into a life that was no longer funded by my exhaustion. The next day, the story spread further. The dinner scene, retold by guests who had been there. The article, now marked up and shared in group chats. I became the father who spoke the truth. The man who shattered the illusion. Isabella tried to spin it, called me vindictive, manipulative, unstable. But the paper trail was undeniable. The math didn't lie. And neither did I. By the end of the week, Cody had resigned from his local business board. Catherine withdrew from 3 of her charity events. Isabella deleted her social media. I said nothing. I issued no statements. I just kept going. Every morning, I made coffee. Sat on the porch. Read. Slept deeply. Ate meals I could afford, paid for by money I didn't have to send to people who only saw me when I was useful. And for the first time in years, I began to feel light again. Not light like joy, but light like unburdened. Like the air belonged to me again. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I had simply outgrown the version of myself who tolerated being dismissed. Who accepted disrespect because it came from family. Who mistook silence for strength. The fallout had come. The storm had passed. And on the other side, I found myself still standing. Whole. A man with his name intact. A father no longer afraid to speak. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, sealed in crisp white, stamped with red, certified mail, signature required. The kind of envelope that doesn't carry greetings or well wishes, but consequences. I signed without hesitation, nodding to the mail carrier as if I'd been expecting it all along. In truth, I had. Not because Michael had warned me, but because life, when stripped of illusion, becomes astonishingly predictable. I set the envelope on the kitchen table and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, Colombian, full-bodied, dark roast, the kind Maria always said reminded her of Sunday mornings when the world moved slower, when we still believed that love, once given, would always come back to you. The envelope remained untouched for several minutes, its presence loud and heavy, even in silence. I didn't rush. I stirred 2 spoons of sugar into my mug, added a splash of cream, and sat down, taking the first sip with the kind of calm that only comes after your last nerve has already been frayed, worn, and finally, severed. When I opened the letter, the words were cold. No apology. No plea. Just numbers and deadlines. Notice of default. Total outstanding balance, $8,400. Your account is currently 3 months in arrears. Payment must be received within 14 calendar days to avoid foreclosure proceedings. There it was. In black and white. The final echo of their decisions. The weight of a house they couldn't afford, resting now in the hands of a bank that didn't care about granite countertops, social status, or who brought what to Christmas dinner. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle, not with shock, but with the grim clarity of inevitability. This was never a question of if, only when. The truth was, the moment I stopped funding their fantasy, the clock began ticking. And now the chime had struck. I thought back to the day Michael had told me, years ago, that they'd finally found, the one, a home with space for a garden, for dinner parties, for their future children to grow up in. He called me that night with so much excitement in his voice I could barely get a word in. I remember how his words tumbled out. Dad, it's perfect. It has crown molding, hardwood floors, and a fireplace. A fireplace, Dad. And then, the hesitation. We just need help with the down payment. Just a little help. So I gave it. Without blinking. Without asking when, or how, or if they'd ever give it back. I handed them my future with the same hands that once carried Michael on my shoulders. I traded the last leg of my working life for their first step into independence. But they didn't build a life from it. They built a theater. A production of elegance, prestige, curated image, a lifestyle so fragile it crumbled the moment the money stopped flowing. And now, with no script left, they were facing the truth. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Not out of dread, but closure. It was done. They had burned through everything, including the last ounce of my willingness to be needed without being valued. My phone buzzed again. Isabella, for the 3rd time that morning. Her message, no doubt, was some mixture of faux remorse and veiled blame. She'd long mastered the art of pretending to be reasonable while sharpening the knife behind her back. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Because there was nothing left to say. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was simply finished. People think closure comes like an ending, final words, clear breaks, slamming doors. But it doesn't. Closure comes like a quiet Tuesday morning, a letter in the mail, a realization that you feel nothing where pain used to live. I took the rest of my coffee to the living room and stood by the window. Across the street, a neighbor was planting tulips. Another walked by with his dog. Ordinary lives, unfolding one step at a time, without drama, without spectacle. That used to be what I wanted. A life of quiet pride. Of being useful. Steady. Present. I had given that life to them, and they traded it for borrowed luxury. Let the foreclosure come. Let the marble floors be reclaimed, the mortgage signs go up, the granite counters be photographed and filed under defaulted assets. Let the house become what it always was, an illusion, dressed in the things they thought would impress the world. As for me, I was already home. In a house with chipped paint, worn floors, and silence that didn't scream rejection, but whispered peace. Later that day, Rosa called. Her voice was warm, casual, curious in the way only family that truly loves you can be. I saw something in the paper, she said. About the house. I told her the truth. She sighed. You warned them. You warned them many times. I know. There was a pause. Then she asked something I wasn't prepared for. Do you feel sad? I thought about it. About all the Christmases alone. All the dinners skipped. The tamales returned untouched. The laughs I wasn't part of. No, I said. Not sad. Free. Because that's what they never understood. They thought I clung to the past because I was weak. Because I couldn't let go. But the truth is, I held on because I believed in them. In Michael. In the idea that family, no matter how flawed, would eventually come back together. But belief needs both hands to stay alive. And they had stopped holding on long ago. Let the house go. Let them start over. They're young. They'll figure it out. Or they won't. Either way, it's no longer my burden. 3 days later, I cleaned out the old cabinet where I used to keep their files. The folders, the receipts, the backups of every wire transfer, every auto payment. I boxed them all. And then I took them to the fireplace, struck a single match, and watched 5 years of sacrifice curl into flame. Not out of spite. But reverence. For the man I used to be, the one who gave, and gave, and gave. And for the man I had become, the one who finally stopped. I sat by the fire until the last ember died. Then I poured a glass of the good whiskey, the one I used to save for when they visited. And I raised it, not in grief, but in gratitude. To peace. To truth. To the letter that came late, but arrived exactly when I needed it most. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, sealed in crisp white, stamped with red, certified mail, signature required. The kind of envelope that doesn't carry greetings or well wishes, but consequences. I signed without hesitation, nodding to the mail carrier as if I'd been expecting it all along. In truth, I had. Not because Michael had warned me, but because life, when stripped of illusion, becomes astonishingly predictable. I set the envelope on the kitchen table and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, Colombian, full-bodied, dark roast, the kind Maria always said reminded her of Sunday mornings when the world moved slower, when we still believed that love, once given, would always come back to you. The envelope remained untouched for several minutes, its presence loud and heavy, even in silence. I didn't rush. I stirred 2 spoons of sugar into my mug, added a splash of cream, and sat down, taking the first sip with the kind of calm that only comes after your last nerve has already been frayed, worn, and finally, severed. When I opened the letter, the words were cold. No apology. No plea. Just numbers and deadlines. Notice of default. Total outstanding balance, $8,400. Your account is currently 3 months in arrears. Payment must be received within 14 calendar days to avoid foreclosure proceedings. There it was. In black and white. The final echo of their decisions. The weight of a house they couldn't afford, resting now in the hands of a bank that didn't care about granite countertops, social status, or who brought what to Christmas dinner. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle, not with shock, but with the grim clarity of inevitability. This was never a question of if, only when. The truth was, the moment I stopped funding their fantasy, the clock began ticking. And now the chime had struck. I thought back to the day Michael had told me, years ago, that they'd finally found, the one, a home with space for a garden, for dinner parties, for their future children to grow up in. He called me that night with so much excitement in his voice I could barely get a word in. I remember how his words tumbled out. "Dad, it's perfect. It has crown molding, hardwood floors, and a fireplace." "A fireplace, Dad." And then, the hesitation. "We just need help with the down payment. Just a little help." So I gave it. Without blinking. Without asking when, or how, or if they'd ever give it back. I handed them my future with the same hands that once carried Michael on my shoulders. I traded the last leg of my working life for their first step into independence. But they didn't build a life from it. They built a theater. A production of elegance, prestige, curated image, a lifestyle so fragile it crumbled the moment the money stopped flowing. And now, with no script left, they were facing the truth. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Not out of dread, but closure. It was done. They had burned through everything, including the last ounce of my willingness to be needed without being valued. My phone buzzed again. Isabella, for the third time that morning. Her message, no doubt, was some mixture of faux remorse and veiled blame. She'd long mastered the art of pretending to be reasonable while sharpening the knife behind her back. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Because there was nothing left to say. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was simply, finished. People think closure comes like an ending, final words, clear breaks, slamming doors. But it doesn't. Closure comes like a quiet Tuesday morning, a letter in the mail, a realization that you feel nothing where pain used to live. I took the rest of my coffee to the living room and stood by the window. Across the street, a neighbor was planting tulips. Another walked by with his dog. Ordinary lives, unfolding one step at a time, without drama, without spectacle. That used to be what I wanted. A life of quiet pride. Of being useful. Steady. Present. I had given that life to them, and they traded it for borrowed luxury. Let the foreclosure come. Let the marble floors be reclaimed, the mortgage signs go up, the granite counters be photographed and filed under defaulted assets. Let the house become what it always was, an illusion, dressed in the things they thought would impress the world. As for me, I was already home. In a house with chipped paint, worn floors, and silence that didn't scream rejection, but whispered peace. Later that day, Rosa called. Her voice was warm, casual, curious in the way only family that truly loves you can be. "I saw something in the paper," she said. "About the house." I told her the truth. She sighed. "You warned them. You warned them many times." "I know." There was a pause. Then she asked something I wasn't prepared for. "Do you feel sad?" I thought about it. About all the Christmases alone. All the dinners skipped. The tamales returned untouched. the laughs I wasn't part of. No, I said. Not sad. Free. Because that's what they never understood. They thought I clung to the past because I was weak. Because I couldn't let go. But the truth is, I held on because I believed in them. In Michael. In the idea that family, no matter how flawed, would eventually come back together. But belief needs both hands to stay alive. And they had stopped holding on long ago. Let the house go. Let them start over. They're young. They'll figure it out. Or they won't. Either way, it's no longer my burden. 3 days later, I cleaned out the old cabinet where I used to keep their files. The folders, the receipts, the backups of every wire transfer, every auto payment. I boxed them all. And then I took them to the fireplace, struck a single match, and watched 5 years of sacrifice curl into flame. Not out of spite. But reverence. For the man I used to be, the one who gave, and gave, and gave. And for the man I had become, the one who finally stopped. I sat by the fire until the last ember died. Then I poured a glass of the good whiskey, the one I used to save for when they visited. And I raised it, not in grief, but in gratitude. To peace. To truth. To the letter that came late, but arrived exactly when I needed it most. It came at dusk. That hour of the day when the light softens, and everything outside the window seems suspended, quiet, almost holy. I was in the kitchen rinsing out my coffee mug when I heard it. A knock. Not loud. Not frantic. Just hesitant. Like someone unsure if they were welcome to be there. And I knew, before I even dried my hands, that it was him. Michael. I paused at the doorway before opening it, not out of hesitation, but out of reverence. This moment wasn't just a visit. It was a reckoning. A final chance for something real to rise from the ashes of everything that had been lost. I opened the door. He stood there in jeans and an old jacket, hands deep in his pockets, his shoulders curled slightly forward like someone trying to shield himself from something colder than the wind. "Hi, Dad," he said. "Michael." We stood like that for a breath too long, the weight of years hanging between us. "Can I come in?" I nodded once and stepped aside. He entered quietly, glancing around the living room like it was unfamiliar. Maybe it was. He hadn't been inside this house, really in it, in years. Not since Maria's funeral. Not since he started measuring worth by square footage and wine labels. "I like what you've done in here," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the newly painted walls. "It feels warmer." "It's mine now," I replied. "All of it." He sat down on the edge of the couch again, just like he had weeks earlier. Only this time, his eyes didn't dart around nervously. He looked directly at me. I didn't know how to say this before. I don't even know if I deserve to say it now. But I'm sorry. I stayed standing, not out of coldness, but because some apologies are best received without collapsing into the moment. I wasn't just absent, Dad. I was complicit. I let them minimize you. I let them make you invisible. And I stood by because I was afraid of losing the life I had built, the approval I had won, the comfort I didn't want to risk. He paused. "And then I watched you walk into that room on New Year's Eve like a man who remembered exactly who he was. And it shook me. Because I realized how much I had forgotten who you were. And who I was supposed to be." I didn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because I knew he needed to say all of his first. "I watched Isabella spiral," he continued. "Her parents disown us. Friends walk away. The house fell into default. And in the middle of that chaos, all I could think about was how you stood up. For yourself. For Mom. For everything they thought they could erase." His voice cracked slightly. I've been trying to remember the last time I made you proud. And I can't. I crossed the room slowly and sat in the recliner opposite him. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, letting the silence stretch just long enough to become sacred. You want to make me proud, Michael? He nodded. Then start by respecting yourself. Because a man who doesn't respect his own backbone will never stand for anyone else. I want to learn that, he said. From you. If you're willing to teach me. I looked at him for a long time. Not at the boy I raised. Not even at the man who betrayed me. But at the person sitting in front of me, flawed, raw, stripped of his armor, finally ready to begin again. I've already forgiven you, I said. Not because you asked, but because I needed to. Carrying that weight was killing me from the inside. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means building forward. He nodded again, slower this time. Absorbing it. The house is gone, he said after a while. We're renting now. Small place. No granite. No fireplace. Do the windows open? I asked. He blinked. Yes. Then you're already better off than before. We both laughed, softly. The first shared laugh in years. It didn't erase the past, but it cracked the door to something real. There's something else I need to say, he added. It's about Mom. I sat back, bracing myself. She wouldn't have let this happen, he said. She would have stood between us. Would have demanded better from me. You're right, I whispered. And she'd have been proud of you, Dad. So proud. For everything you did. And for finally stopping. That was the moment the tightness in my chest loosened. Like someone finally lifted the lid from a box I'd buried deep. Thank you, I said. Not for the apology. But for the truth. He stood up, unsure whether to stay or leave. I'll come back Sunday, he said. If that's okay. I'd like to help with the yard. Bring my son. He misses you. I think he deserves to know who his grandfather really is. I nodded. I'd like that. He walked to the door, then paused. I'm sorry it took me losing everything to realize what mattered. Sometimes that's the only way we learn, I said. But don't just be sorry, Michael. Be different. He gave me one last look. Not of guilt. Not of pity. But of respect. Quiet. Earned. And left. When the door closed, I didn't cry. I simply stood there in the stillness and let the truth settle. This wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. But it was an opening. And after years of locked doors, even a knock at dusk can sound like redemption. It was New Year's Eve again. 12 months had passed since I walked into their dinner party with a briefcase full of truth and a heart finally done begging for a place at a table I helped build. But tonight was different. No invitations to check. No names to look for on guest lists that would never include mine. No anxious phone calls waiting to be answered. Just me, the scent of cinnamon from the cobbler I'd baked that morning, and a slow jazz record spinning softly in the background. The house was warm. The lights low. The table was set for 3, me, Rosa, and her husband, Daniel. Simple dishes, nothing curated for Instagram. A roast, seasoned potatoes, her famous collard greens, and a bottle of wine with a crooked label and a screw cap. At 7:15, they arrived with a bang of laughter, Rosa shouting my name as she stepped inside like she owned the place. She carried a tray of empanadas, still warm, and Daniel had a paper crown on his head that their granddaughter had made. Why do you smell like you baked something just for me? Rosa teased, setting the tray on the counter. Because I did, I replied, handing her a fork and a smile. There was no tension. No balancing of egos. No avoidance of topics. We spoke freely, about life, about regrets, about hope. Daniel told the same joke he tells every year. We laughed anyway. Rosa made fun of his bald spot, then of mine, then of her own wrinkles. I told them they were both lucky to be aging beside someone who still made them laugh. At 9:30, we moved to the living room. We played dominoes. Talked about old music. Watched a documentary that none of us really paid attention to because we kept pausing it to tell stories. At 11:50, we stepped outside with mugs of cider, wrapped in scarves and coats. The neighborhood was alive, families lighting fireworks, children laughing, music spilling through windows. And that's when I saw them. Michael and his son, walking up the street. They weren't dressed up. No pretense. Just a father and son holding hands, wearing matching hoodies, cheeks red from the cold. My grandson spotted me first. He waved, grinning. "Grandpa." I waved back, heart tightening. They reached the porch, and Michael looked at me with eyes that had softened over the past year, humbled, grounded, searching less for approval and more for connection. "I thought maybe we could watch the fireworks from here," he said, voice careful. Rosa looked at me. I gave her the slightest nod. "Of course," I said. "There's cider inside." We stood together as the new year began. No speeches. No resolutions. Just presence. When midnight struck, the sky lit up in bursts of color. Gold, red, blue. My grandson cheered. Daniel raised his glass. Rosa kissed his cheek. And Michael, after a long hesitation, turned to me. "Happy New Year, Dad." I looked at him, not at the man he used to be, not at the boy I had once held, but at the person he was now, broken in the right places, shaped by truth, finally capable of being real. "Happy New Year, son." We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Some healing doesn't announce itself. It just lives quietly in the space between people who finally stopped lying to each other. Later, after they left, Rosa helped me clean the kitchen. She washed. I dried. She handed me a plate, still warm from the water, and said, "You've changed." "I've come home to myself," I answered. She smiled. "Took long enough. I had to get lost first." When she left, I stood alone at the kitchen sink, looking out at the street where the last of the fireworks faded. The porch light was on. The house smelled like food and people and laughter. There were crumbs on the counter. Empty mugs in the sink. Signs of a life being lived, not performed. I walked to the living room, took the photo of Maria from the mantel, and held it for a long time. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I didn't let them erase me. I didn't let pain define me. I didn't stay small for the comfort of people who feared my worth. Instead, I became quiet in the right way, not invisible, but free. Not waiting for permission to exist, but standing in the truth of who I had always been." I placed the photo back beside the new one, me, Rosa, Daniel, and the kids from Easter. I had learned something this year that I wish I'd known sooner. Real family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes, it's the one that shows up. The one that listens. The one that laughs with you at your worst, not just claps at your best. The new year had begun, and with it, a life no longer filtered through the expectations of others. I sat in my chair, wrapped myself in the old quilt Maria had made, and listened to the silence. Not the lonely kind. The sacred kind. The kind that lives inside a heart no longer waiting to be seen.